Hi, welcome to Culture and Causation. I'm Aaron Briley, and today we'll be discussing the issue that really wasn't on my radar until I read my guest's article. Now, my guest today is Marc Hyden, and the article is titled HB272, Juvenile Code, Juvenile Court to Include Children Who Are Under 18 Years of Age, Change Jurisdiction. Now, Marc is the Director of State Government Affairs at the R Street Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy research organization. And the mission of the Institute is to engage in policy research and outreach to promote free markets and limited effective government in many areas, including criminal justice reform. So today we'll discuss his article and why raising the age of adult criminal responsibility is worth thinking about. But before we go any further, I'd like to introduce my guest, Marc. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great. So your article focuses on juveniles in the criminal justice system, and specifically you want to raise the age of adult criminal responsibility to 18 years old in the states where it's currently 17 years old. And I think actually the state you focus on is Georgia. So first of all, just from someone who's not familiar with this, with these laws, it seems harsh that 17-year-olds are being tried as adults because, well, two reasons that come to mind: because their prefrontal cortex aren't really fully formed until much later. And I also think most people in this country believe that the official age of adulthood recognized by the government is either 18 to vote or drive or 21 to buy alcohol. So my first question is, are 17-year-olds being tried as adults in these states for all crimes, or is this only for the most heinous of crimes?
Yeah, and it's a fair question. So it depends. There's a lot going on in different states, but every state except for Wisconsin, Texas, and Georgia has outlawed unilaterally, just or summarily, I should say, charging and trying all 17-year-olds as adults. Now, in those three states that remain, it's for any crime. It doesn't matter what it is. In the eyes of the law, they are not considered children or adolescents. They're considered adults. But it kind of just brings up all of this the contradicting information that we have out there and the views that we have. We just changed the age to buy cigarettes to 21 because evidently we think that people are impressionable if they're younger than that. But yet at 17, we can charge them as an adult and let them or force them to go through a criminal justice system that may end up ruining their lives. It's bizarre.
Okay. You list quite a few problems with trying 17-year-olds as adults in the article. You state, quote, "The adult criminal justice system is not well suited for juveniles. When placed in the juvenile system, youths have access to numerous programs tailor-made for their age group, which reduces recidivism rates, thereby erasing the financial burden of the justice system as a whole." So can you explain why we should treat 17-year-olds as juveniles and not adults?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of things going on at once there. But if you look at what happens to youth, 17-year-olds that are put in adult prison, they're disproportionately targeted with physical and sexual abuse at a much higher rate than actual adults who are in prison, and that leaves a lot of lasting harm, whether it's emotional, psychological, physical. I can only imagine. Certainly, people like that would be better served with others that are around their age. But the difference between the adult criminal justice system and the juvenile one is there's more of a focus on rehabilitation. I think in the juvenile system, there's more programming, there's more counseling available to ensure that we can turn lives around if that is the case with the individual, or we can demonstrate why they made a mistake. But you touched on one point at the beginning: is it's all about brain development. There's reams of research demonstrating that 17-year-olds, they're not adults, at least from the cognitive perspective. It takes longer for their brains to develop so that they can reason, kind of determine cause and effect and the consequences of their actions more quickly. And they're also likely to act impulsively and aggressively. So that kind of calls into question whether they're even culpable to the level of being tried as an adult. And whereas I'm sure you were a fantastic 17-year-old, I was
Absolutely.
not.
Just
I was a
kidding.
very dumb 17-year-old, and some might say that I'm a dumb 30 some odd year old. But I've gotten a little bit better at processing. But that's why I think it's really important to treat kids like as kids and ensure they get the help they need to be productive adults.
And what about employment prospects for these formerly incarcerated juveniles? Um, are the records sealed? Like once they have a juvenile record, are their records sealed or expunged in a way that adult records are not?
No. So if you get arrested as a 17-year-old and you don't benefit from any sort of expunction or expungement or first offender, a retroactive first offender, your records are out there. And that's going to make it harder for you to get a job. It's going to make it harder for you to get a loan. It's going to make it harder for you to uh, go to college, because I think over 70% of colleges require background checks, and somewhere around 90% of employers ask for background checks as well. So a mistake that you committed as a 17-year-old, as you know, it might have been a mistake, might have been something you just didn't think through, that can haunt you for the rest excuse me, the rest of your life. And in fact, it's almost a life sentence in a way, to do that. But we have found, because we've worked on clean slate issues as well as second chance issues, is that individuals who have had their records expunged, um, they do far better. They almost immediately start earning, I think, 25% more. And of course, there's obvious reasons for that, because they don't have that scarlet letter that they're carrying. But
Mhm.
one thing that I skipped, and I should have mentioned it earlier, is one of the differences that the importance of putting these individuals in the juvenile system is that it reduces recidivism. And there was two different studies that compared what happens to juveniles in the adult system and what happens to juveniles of the similar age on
Mhm.
similar crimes in other states. And they found that it reduced recidivism between 34 and 77% if they were placed with people of their own age and provided the protection if they were incarcerated.
And do we know why? Is it just because that they're not being taken advantage of when they're in juvenile facilities, or there's just more resources and more programs in there to help these 17-year-olds become contributing citizens?
I think it's a combination of the two. I mean, certainly they have more protections, more guards to ensure that they aren't being attacked or preyed upon. But it is these programs and the counseling that they have access to, and some of them have been very successful. And we've seen criminal justice reforms in many states that demonstrate this. But unfortunately, Georgia, which used to lead the nation in criminal justice reform, has struggled to raise the age of adult criminal responsibility. And we have a bill. It's a great bill. It's a good start. It passed the House, passed the Senate committee, but it didn't get a floor vote by the end of sine die, which was earlier this week. So it's still alive next year, and I'm hoping to see its final passage. But I would note that it's not. It raises the age primarily just for misdemeanors. So there are some of the more violent crimes, those would still be automatically treated as adults. But even in other states that had more liberal raise the age legislation, there are other avenues to try juveniles as adults, but it has to be done on a case by case basis. And they have to make the case for why they need to do that.
I see. And you also discussed some pushback to this. So I wanted to know if you could explain what the pushback is, and is that justified in your opinion?
Well, I mean, when it comes to government, well, first of all, the pushback is generally this is going to cost a lot of money, and we just don't want to spend money for whatever reason. And I understand that. I'm a fiscal conservative, so people generally point to fiscal notes that have come out from several states saying that it may cost as much as $100 million annually, additionally, and those are terrifying numbers for lawmakers to consider, but we've seen it rolled out in states with these fiscal notes that have shown that they really had no basis in reality. I think it was Connecticut that had that $100 million price tag, but their juvenile justice budget actually shrunk by 2 million the following year. But it just depends. Some states have paid a little bit more, others it remained the same, and then you have places like Connecticut where they actually saved money. It's just these fiscal notes tend not to be very accurate. They don't consider this is reducing recidivism. It's reducing court costs. There's also a reallocation of resources from the adult system to the juvenile system, and there's a lot of issues that unfortunately they tend not to delve into, but we have plenty of data showing that it's probably revenue neutral, but there's a chance, depending on the year, it may cost a little bit more or a little bit less. And given that and all of the risks and dangers of trying children as adults, I think that's a price that we're willing to pay to ensure that they're put in the juvenile system.
One reason you bring up, and I think you touched on this just now, but the idea that if these juveniles don't reoffend, that can save money too, right, over the long term.
Of course, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity costs that can be saved. There's many different expenses that can be cut, and a lot of the times they point to the juvenile system being more costly per capita, and they point to the number of guards per youth. So they look at the programming that's available. But in the end, there's immense cost savings, and I've seen a few. I'm trying to see if I can pull it out. I think PolitiFact said that for every dollar spent on juvenile justice programs like this of raising the age, the state saves around $10. So that's
Wow.
a tenfold return is pretty good. Wisconsin also did a study, and they found that it could save many millions of dollars if they did this. Unfortunately, Wisconsin's one of those states that just hasn't been willing to raise the age yet.
Thank you so much for talking with me. But I wanted to ask though, is there anything else about this issue that you think people should know, or have we covered like most of the broader points?
No, I think this has been thorough, but I think we can distill this down to a pretty simple statement, and that's if you want a more fiscally responsible system that reduces crime and gives children a second chance, then raising the age of adult criminal responsibility, that's for you.
That's a great way to sum it up. My last question then is, where can people find more information about this topic? Are there any resources available to the general public?
Yeah, we have written extensively. R Street has written extensively on this, as well as I have. We have studies, white papers, op-eds on it. So go to rstreet.org. You can find a whole host of information on that and many other issues. You'll find out that we're quirky and cool. At least I'm biased, but I think so. And if anyone wants to send me fan mail, they're more than welcome to at mhyden@rstreet.org.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. This has been a pleasure, and I really appreciate having you on.
That was my pleasure.